Hey everybody, welcome back to the AshenMythos. This is your host, ShadowedSin. I'll be running the show until someone signs up. So, anyway, let us begin. Last time we discussed the recent updates in the cartel with the recent content update known as the Old Way, and now we are steadily moving on to a new update, which is moving us closer to launch. And what we've done recently is we've mostly began changing a few things. The forums are now at our official launch status, and we have also cleaned up a few of our documents to make things a bit clearer. Now, this particular episode is going to be focusing on specifically the creation and filling out of biographies. Now, before I begin, let me introduce my commentators for today. All of them are Cartelites. We have Darkonxy. Darkon, why don't you say hello?
Hello.
Alright, we have Kyndra, who's a newer member. Why don't you say hello, Kyndra?
Rawr.
And then we have Toxa. Toxa. Okay, Toxa's asleep right now. Alright, let's move on. So, again, today's episode is going to focus specifically on the biography aspect of the guild, which is a little bit different than other guilds. And quickly to explain, what happens is when you join the Ashenfold cartel, you fill out an application like many other guilds. The big difference with this is that our application does not have a character section dedicated to it. All it is a writing sample. What our application is, basically, is it's a social contract with a little bit of a sample to show you have a understanding of the English language and literacy. And we do this because we really don't know for a fact that people are going to be bringing in a full character. That they're always going to know what their character is going to be. A lot of people kind of know who their character is, others don't. So we kind of make the assumption that we're going to let people make their choice from the beginning. So how this works is that a member of the guild, once they pass the application and they've been approved, they get the rank of recruit. Now, someone is a recruit until they put in their first character biography. And once that biography is approved, the character is then added to the full canon, the continuity of the guild itself, which means once a biography is in, that player can start manipulating the guild storyline. They can partake in these big epic stories we hope to see once the game launches in a few weeks. That is, at this moment, we are only about 8 days away from recording. So if you're hearing this in the future, hi, welcome to the past. So let's move along. So a biography can be a little bit of a hard thing to fill out. If anyone's confused, a biography is a character sheet, also called a character profile by many other people. Now, in the Ashenfold cartel, we have what we call the character standard, which is this big list of things we looked through, and we'll cover that in a minute. But let's kind of begin with the basics of character creation. Every character begins with a character concept. So, Kyndra, why don't you tell us what a character concept is?
Generally, the character concept is, it could be, like, are you going to be a thief, a sneaky type person, or an evil, just you can kind of go with D&D with alignments, in a sense. Is there going to be a paladin kind of person, or stuff like that?
Yeah, so, like, you could be, for example, back in the White Wolf games, they have to tell you things. So, like, your character concept could be a vampire blood pimp, a blood doll pimp, which is someone who sells humans to other vampires for their blood. Now, in Guild Wars 2, you could have a character that is, a hero. That's a pretty simple one. Another one is you can make a villain. That's really simple, but you can be a little bit more specific. You can say, I want to make an apprentice inventor, or I want to make, an industrial warrior. You can just think of concept. A concept really isn't like a gigantic paragraph. It's basically like a character image, a few words to kind of describe the basis of a character. And Anet actually has this concept. They call them what they call 3 beats. And they have 3 words to describe each of their iconics or any of their characters. And that's kind of what a character concept is. So if you're sitting there and you're kind of staring at the biography sheet, just kind of go, what is the basis? What is the core root? What is my inspiration for this character? It can even be like your favorite show. If you're a big fan of Game of Thrones, maybe you want to make a Tyrion-like character. If you watch Captain Planet, I know it's kind of obscure, but there's some viable character concepts in Captain Planet. It's kind of silly. Just think of what kind of characters you want to tell a story for, and just let them, and then we'll get into this. A lot of the things we'll say is let the character tell you. What it means is just let your mind wander and think about ideas, even just brainstorm. So once you got that down, you're going to want to kind of line that concept up with a race and a class, or a profession, big character classes. So if you want to make a sneaky type character and you want to have sneaky type abilities, you're probably going to want to play an adventure class. So, if you want to be a superbly sneaky type, maybe you want to be a thief. But if you want to be a more, more skirmishing, sneaky type, maybe you want to be a ranger. Just think of, and the class doesn't have to always be exactly what you think, what the type is. You can play a ranger who's not sneaky. You can play a thief who's not sneaky. It's more about the abilities too. Just think about what kind of abilities and what kind of archetype you want the character to be. And then once you get a greater sense of who the character is, start thinking about what race fits them, because each race has different cultures, has different subcultures, and it gets really kind of complicated, I know. But if you really want to play like an independent-minded person who may or may not be religious, then I would play a human. If you want to play a really unique individual who's all about, their self-story, proving their skill, then play a Norn. If you want to be someone who's kind of snarky, maybe is kind of has a problem with superiority, make an Asura. If you want to be kind of honor bound or kind of twisted, or you're really into Irish Fae, or you just love characters that are kind of surreal, try an Asura. I mean, a Sylvari. Sorry about that. Asura would work if you were kind of insane. But at the same time, if you want to play, if you really, let's say you're a Star Trek fan, you really like Klingons, but you want to be a little bit more regimented, then you know what? Char. Just think about it. Read through the different races and get a sense for what the character feels for you. So now we're kind of moving away from the Guild Wars 2 lore. We're going to go more into the aspects of the guild itself, of Ashenfold. So in Ashenfold, the first section of the character biography is the player, and that is, just what we want to know about you. So we asked for your character limitations up right, and if you want to know quickly what a character limitation is, that is kind of what you don't like to roleplay, or you don't want to roleplay on that character. For example, I have characters that I'm going to roleplay that will probably have really horrible things done to them, and at the same time, I have other characters who are more for lighthearted stuff. So after you do that, and you kind of thought about your race, and then you think about what kind of affiliation, what kind of ethnic aspects they have to them, then you're kind of getting a feel, right? So I'm going to quickly pop up, and I'm going to talk about this example character, and she'll be linked in the, I'm going to refer back to her, and she'll be linked in the description for the podcast. I created this human character known as Gretchen Selwyn. She's the infamous example character for the guild. Gretchen is a warrior. I wanted her to be a fighter, but I didn't want her to be a magic user. So she's a warrior. I wanted her to have a sense of who she was and some other things. Plus, she doesn't like nobles, so she's Ascalonian, and she's also just a seraph. She's just a garrison guard. All she does is live near Nibu Terrace and defend, and work as a defensive line soldier. And so it's not a really epic character. This is not a character that's going to run around trying to take over the cartel and rule the world. But we have a sense of that. And that section is called the basics. That's the basic aspects of your character. That's your class, that's your occupation, that's their day job. And then there's what, if you heard about us talk about role. A role is something that, and I'll bring this up in a minute. Actually, let's go on this tangent. A lot of people ask me about, I'm not sure about what the character roles are. And I often tell them that the role is really what you do for the cartel. And there's like over 30 roles in the guild. So if you're having a hard time trying to fit your character to a role, take a break and think more about where your character would go. So if you really aren't sure, I would suggest going and role-playing out what we call the initiation. And this is kind of a different thing, and this is going to tie up with the later section called the joining. But if you really want to just let your character tell you where to go, and you don't want to get that bio in right away, then stay a recruit, role play out the initiation, and let your character decide. If they're going to end up working for the hunt as a tracker or as a hitman, let your story decide where you're going to go. So we'll get into that again once we move on. So now, I know I'm talking a lot here, and I'm kind of having Kyndra and Darkonxy just sit there, but I will bring this up in a minute. So we're going to move on to appearance. But before I begin with that, I'm going to just reference again, we have a character standard. When we say have a character standard, we basically have this big list, this list of things we look for. And for appearance, we look for the following. You need to describe what your character's facial appearance looks like. So what kind of nose do they have? What kind of eyes? That kind of thing. They don't necessarily be super descriptive. What is their general height, their weight, their musculature, and body build? So when we read this, we want to get a sense of what they look like, what their body is shaped like. If your character is going to be one of those types that runs around and fights a lot, we're going to kind of expect you to have scars. Because even though there is magic in the world of Tyria, you don't have the level of healing or resurrection that existed in the time of Guild Wars 1. So there is going to be scartation on your character's body if he's running around and getting the crap beaten out of him all the time. Finally, what kind of, what kind of dress do they have? What was their favorite attire? What kind of armor do they prefer? And at the same time, if you're going to be describing the character to us, we have this saying in Ashenfold: don't tell us you're attractive, describe you're attractive. We really don't want to know that your character is attractive because this concept is subjective. And a lot of people are going to wonder, what do you mean by subjective? And if you really sit down and start talking to people what they consider to be attractive, that's what we mean. Everybody's going to have a different definition of what is attractive, what is hot, what is juicy, what the fuck you want to say. So, and that is going to be a major theme in all of the comments that you get when you join the guild and you put up your biography, and officer will send you notes about this, and they're going to use the standard. So let's quickly move on to the personality. With the personality, we kind of want to know a few things. So, what are your character's faults? What are their strengths? What are their goals? And what are their motivations? And if you really need some help, feel free to use alignment. If you're really trying to understand who your character is, you can go, they're lawful evil, and lawful evil gives you a sense of personality, or lawful good. But at the same time, if you're really not sure about who your character is, just kind of sit down and think, what are they good at? What are they good at socially? What are they good physically? Physically, if it's something physically, I would stick down the physical description. But if they're not good, just start thinking, what are they good at? Then once you kind of get a sense of what they're good at, then start thinking about how those good things don't always play out well for them. You want this character to be a person. If you're really good at using a sword, you're not necessarily always going to be good at using a bow. If you're a rough and ready fighter, you're not going to have the best table manners. Think about this. Think about, if you're going to expend your character in one direction, it's going to be depleted in another. And this is really how you can create some really good, simple balances and simple faults. If you really want your character, though, to have some extreme faults, like my character was sexually abused, then I highly suggest that you take the time to write it carefully. Anything like sexual abuse, rape, mental disease, this is not something you should take lightly. If you do it too much, all you're going to end up with is basically insulting an entire group of people. And I know some people are probably going to think I'm a little harsh about this, but if you're going to pull out something that's really unique, you want to do something specifically that is what you would consider unique. One, you need to write it well, and two, you need to do the research behind it. So let's I'm just going to jump down and do the joining. I know I'm moving here a bit fast, but I hope everybody's keeping up. Is everybody keeping up with me?
Yep.
All right, here we go. So we cover personality. We're quickly jumping down the history. So history in the bio is split between two sections. We have what we call the joining, which is the major section, and then we have what we call life history. Joining the cartel specifically talks about how your character ended up working for or is related or connected to this esoteric organization. So what we're trying to prevent here is what I often call the random elf in the room. So why is the elf there? And with the joining, that's what we aim for. So what the joining really does is it asks you, what is the how and what is the why? So if you are a character, you're a char, why would you be working for the cartel? I have a few ideas. My character, Sook, well, he was on a joint mission with Ash Legionnaires, who had signed up with mercenaries that were invested in by the cartel. The warband ended up seeking a bit too much information, and they went from what we would probably call the law-abiding layer of legality, if you heard me talk about this in the past, to what we call the knowing too much. And once they learned that, they were offered the job of doing several other jobs that would in turn not only benefit the cartel, but would benefit the Ash Legion. So in turn, that's how my character Sook ended up becoming a collector, and which is someone who goes around collecting and collecting artifacts and magical creatures, and then a questioner, which is a person trained to assassinate rogue mages or casters. Sook already did that, but because he now works for the cartel, he now fits those roles. That's what he does in general. He kills people that are magic users, and he hunts down artifacts. So you can see here how my character's history of what they did transferred directly into the cartel. So that's one way how you want to kind of decide what your character's role is. Just see what they do in real life and see how the cartel could benefit from that. And you don't even have to have your character, know about the cartel. You could just be working at the De Robert Social Club and just be a waitress. You could be working in the gambling den and just be a dealer. You don't have to go right into the knowing too much. You can just be the average Joe working for this business, or the average Joe who works for one of the sects and just gets contracts. We have a member named Shocks, and I'm pretty sure all his character does is get contracts. I don't think he knows too much about the fact that the hunt also has hitmen in it. And that's the fantastic thing about the cartel. There's layers of plausible deniability that allow you to not have this sense of having to explain everything. So my suggestion to everybody who's joined the cartel and is trying to fit their character in is this. Don't try to overthink it. If you're unsure, role play it in. And last but not least, just have fun. It's all there. Don't try to worry about all of it. Just stick to the basics, stick to simplicity. So on that end, when it comes to what we call the initiation, which is one way how to write out the joining, we have this entire guide that goes into it. And what the initiation guide basically covers is it covers 3 forms of connection. Existing connection, no connection, and forced connection. An existing connection means you know someone that is in the cartel, it's a family member, it's someone in your, maybe someone you worked for, or you ended up working for someone later on. And so what we did with this is you have, I believe, a total of, let's see, I don't know, I'm counting this, and it's several different character hooks. And that's not even including the bonded character hooks. So, for example, you have a character hook called The Legacy. And then what it says is you are a member of a family who has served the cartel for at least a generation. Up until a certain point, you didn't know about the shadowy organization, and until it was revealed to you. At this point, you were given the tasks and initiated to the cartel under the watch of a handler. That is an example. You can make up your own character hooks. There is one where it's just, I was looking for work and I worked at the social club. Or I worked at the, the Baron's Den. Or you just got a contract. The cartel is a gigantic organization that needs people to help survive the dragons. So it's going to be looking for people. So on another end, we also have a description of the why. Now with the why, that's going to be a little bit stronger. Whys don't have to be really decisive. They can be simple as, I have no food, or it's my job. But you have to kind of think about why. It doesn't, again. So for example, if you're a lawful good character, and we broke this down by alignment under here, a lawful good character might join the cartel under the pretense of looking to use the resources it provides as means to help others. You could be a lawful good character, not know about all the horrible things the cartel is doing, and you could be working for a charity and be using the funds you gain in that charity to help people in Queensdale or Divinity's Reach, or to refund local war, or to refund a local Farrar. It doesn't need to be, everything is big and shadowy. That's the wonderful thing about the cartel. The reason why we have everything is big and shadowy is because, like in most good conspiracy novels, there are people who often don't know what they're doing. And that is a big point of the guild. So if you really aren't sure that you want to explain all the shadowiness, don't. Stick to simple, stick to just local groups, stick to what you know about your characters in the territory. And that's the area that you work in. Alright, so that's the joining. The final section we have in the bio is simply called the life history. Now, life history really should play into what you've been writing in the personality. And I know I'm going to bring this out of nowhere, but let me get into it. Life history is broken down into a few different sections. And that is your character as a child, their early childhood, their coming of age, and then the more recent times. So you can think about it this way. Birth to young childhood, kind of affirming who your character is. If you think about most kids, they don't really know who they are as a small child. Some of them are very definite, some are not. Around the teenage to young adult years is when they're really starting to define themselves as a person. And in the recent years, the last bit of the history should be kind of them defining who they are. Now, you don't have to do all 3. Your character can be really young and be brought into the cartel and just be starting to figure out who they are. That'd be a fantastic way to create some various faults. Your character is inexperienced. They need to learn more about who they are. But a really good way to figure out even more about your personality and even your appearance is write up your history and then see how the history would have affected this person you're creating. If you grew up in a really traumatic childhood, you're not going to be a necessarily stable person, or you're going to be so stable but have problems in your life. And a lot of people like to do, unstable lives. I would love to see someone who had a farming life and was just a kid who wanted to go save Kryta. There's quite a few people who are doing that, and I love them for doing that. So things don't have to be messy. Things can just be simple. You can be the kid, grew up on the farm, lived and raised goats, whatever, and then you picked up a sword and you're like, I'm not really good at fighting with a sword, but I'm going to go fight with a seraph to save my homeland from centaurs. That could be a character who joins the cartel eventually and is just someone who is maybe a valiant. And that's a character type that basically goes around helping someone. Maybe they're a wandering priest. That's an idealist. So that's a way how you can just let the roleplay take you to the role, but also how the history, in a way, can affect who your character is, personality, and even appearance-wise. So, once you put this character up, you basically, what happens next is, and a note here, if you are putting your bio up early and you don't want it looked at, you need to put what we call a work in progress tag. And that's basically, you just put in parentheses WIP. Now, if you have that up there and you're done and you haven't removed it, the officers are not going to look at it. That's because we usually get a lot of biographies in waves, or we often work on several different ones. And that pretty much is, we have to prioritize things. So if you want to get your bio looked at, you need to remove that WIP. So once that's done, here comes the next stage. All right. So you're going to put in your biography. So-and-so is searching, approval for the name of the sect. Once that goes in there, your biography is now pending. What will happen is the officers will see your biography. We will then post a thread inside of the officer forum that has a list of things. Basically, it's a link to your thread, and then what they do in there is they put up their notes. So we keep a constant record of it. And then once the notes are ready, we send them to you. And then once you're ready for the edits, you'll put up a response that says ready for the next round. Now, some people are going to wonder, why in the world are we asking for edits? And I know I'm going to bring this up. And when I say edits, I mean, yes, sometimes we're going to ask you to change your character. And the truth about this is that Ashenfold does have a character standard. And not to be mean to anyone, but we do ask everybody in the guild, even myself, to follow the standard. And the things I described to you earlier were that standard. If you can read the list and it's in the biography template page, it's right there. If you hit all of those points, you're going to get approved pretty quickly. What they tend to look for after that the standard is met is they're going to start looking for lore inconsistencies. So if you say that your Char loves magic and loves the gods of man, then they're going to ask you why. They're going to ask for an explanation. And if your character, you really can't provide a solid explanation, you're probably going to get asked to change that. Now, the one thing we have here, and the big thing in Ashenfold, is we don't allow characters to be leading members of existing NPC factions. And the reason for that is that we can't control them. We can't control that kind of description. We can't control that in general. And it's unfair to anyone that you're saying, well, I'm a captain of the Seraph, because then you automatically have power over people and they're not going to probably recognize it. At the same time, we're also going to look for descriptions to state who your character is in the fashion of, I'm attractive. Well, we mentioned this earlier. That's a subjective point. So don't tell us you're attractive. Describe someone we think is attractive. If we see a lot of points where your character is succeeding and we don't see a sense of failing at any points, because everybody fails at some point. No one succeeds at everything. There's always a payment. There's always a string attached. And so I'm going to quickly hand it over to Kyndra, and she's going to describe what that is. And we often call that a special snowflake or a Mary Sue. So, Kyndra, without going into the, screaming at people, that's a Mary Sue, could you kind of give people an idea what a Mary Sue is? And I'll be right back.
Yeah, so Mary Sue is generally, if you're new, generally you wouldn't know about this if you're new to the roleplay world. A Mary Sue, when was it? Did it come about? Like 19 something? I don't remember. But it's a character that someone makes up that is perfect in almost every way. It also tends to be close to the person, related to the person who's them. My brain's farting. Like if you made a character yourself, pretty much, and made them as awesome as possible, that is pretty much a Mary Sue. What things you could do to not be a Mary Sue is generally give them faults, and a good amount of faults. But they have to remain logical. You can't just throw faults in there. But the main thing is with Mary Sue's is avoiding being perfect, being pretty. Well, I mean, you could be pretty, but you can't say that you're pretty, as Sin's already said plenty of times. What else? What was the third thing? Any fault can fix a Mary Sue pretty much. What's the third one?
I can cover that quickly. A real simple way also to fix a Mary Sue is go into your personality, go into your history, and avoid words that state your character is really awesome. And when I say that, is don't say that I'm a master of ancient sword crafts. Well, for one, if you're going to be a master, if you're going to say I'm a master of swordsmanship, your character needs to kind of have a payment in, if you want to say, have some kind of limitations. If you spend years training for the sword, we're talking about a character that has decent muscle control, has good predictive ability of opponents, and is probably a fairly old character. We're not saying like, don't even think 20s, think 30s to 40s. You know, someone who has mastered the sword style and has reached to the point where they have succeeded their own master. If you're going to be, so this is one reason why when we have people that use these really, really emphasized wording, that we tell them, don't say I'm impressive. Don't say I'm mighty. Don't use words that overemphasize your skills. Just say I'm skilled or I'm decently skilled. And then when you do that, kind of gives us a sense about how your character has failings at the same time. And then when I bring up the subject of special snowflake, when we say special snowflake, we're talking about characters that have tropes or aspects to them that either break lore or really push the boundaries of lore. So a good example would be a mesmer that can read minds. Now, a lot of people are going to probably tell me that they disagree. And they're free to do that. I'm not telling people that they can't roleplay that. But if you want to roleplay a character that reads minds, you're going to need some solid lore other than Queen Jenna doing it. Because Queen Jenna read the mind of an elder dragon. That's an extreme case. The same can be said about mages making themselves live forever by using blood magic. There was one mage that did something like that, but he ended up almost killing an entire forest in Cantha. Hundreds of acres. So this is a level of RP that goes beyond the collective public setting of the game. If you want to set up a forum and do this in private, that's fantastic. But if you're going to be an Ashenfold cartel, your character can't have any unfair advantages, that really make it so that people can't somehow counteract them. If you're going to roleplay, what we often ask people is stick to the general class ability. Mesmers can minutely change their appearance. That's fine. An elementalist can light things on fire. That fits within their abilities. But a warrior isn't going to be running around with a flaming sword unless it was summoned by an elementalist. Warriors can't manage and use magic in that manner. And if anyone asks why we're not doing the whole dual classing thing, and the simple answer is this. This is Guild Wars 2, that is Guild Wars 1. The lore has changed, and the world has changed. So, when we do everything, what we often look for is if there's going to be anything that's kind of special, that is a little unique, like when we say unique, and when I say unique is if I take away that aspect of the character shouldn't fall flat on its face. Because that means you've created a stew, or you've created a special snowflake. A special snowflake, by definition, means you're propping a character up on one aspect. If all I did for my characters and says that they just want to kill their father, well, that's fantastic. That is the driving force. But if I take away that, you can still see that my character, Yohara, is still a person. That should be the same thing. So if your character is a char that is a gladium, and you want to say, well, my character is a char, and then he does a lot of unique stuff because he's a gladium, that's fantastic. But the catch is your character is an outcast. They're an untouchable. They're considered trash. They're not going to be respected by other char. So you shouldn't use things like that just to do something. And this will catch up onto this, and this is often called purple human syndrome. We call it a purple people syndrome. But that is, if you're going to make a character that really likes and plays like another race, then if you're going to make, like for example, you're going to make a char, and the char is acting like a human, you may want to just make a human. If you're going to pick a race or pick something else, you should research their biology to some point. So char have a different biology than humans. Norn have different culture. They have different biology than humans. They can take a hit that would probably generally kill a human. So this is going to change how your character is seen. So when we read through the biography, we're going to check for aspects that might make it so that you're trying to dictate to other people. An example of that is, well, everybody knows that I'm a badass assassin who lives in the middle of Divinity's Reach. Truthful answer is, no one, unless they've actually met your character or met you, is going to know that you're the badass assassin. So dictating to everybody that you're the badass assassin is kind of moot. Saying that you're going to have some kind of special skill or some kind of aspect that your character can't roleplay is that you, the player, can't roleplay probably is not a good idea. And if you want to have some kind of, fault, like extreme fault, some people really like to roleplay blindness. When we have people who roleplay blindness, the general answer for that is you better not be a combatant, because there's not a lot of good solid evidence right now that there are many good blind fighters in the Guild Wars 2 universe. Plus, the honest answer is a lot of people who have sight don't understand the aspects of what it means to be blind. So unless you're going to take the time to really research that, don't go for those extreme faults. Pick simpler ones. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to look for. It's not going to be as blunt or is that we're very nice. We don't tell you that your character sucks. What we often do is we guide you through everything. You know, we often give you suggestions. So if your character wants to have something, we're going to do our best to read through the lore and really help you find a way to keep that core aspect of your character, unless it's really pushing the boundary. So, often what happens is you will get the notes, then you'll get some information about how to change it, and then we'll go through a few rounds, and generally you get approved within about 3 or 4 rounds, and depending upon how much you put in. The more you put in on the character, if you're putting in more than you see on the example character biography, then you're probably going to have more details that need to be covered. If you're doing the bare minimum, which is, just enough to reach the standards, we might ask for a bit more, but once you reach that, you're good to go. So once your character's approved, you become a cartelite, they get put into the character directory, and you start out as either a tier 1, if you're role-playing your way into the guild, or as a tier 2, which is a cartelite, someone who works for the guild but doesn't necessarily know it's an evil thing. Once you reach that, it's really your decision on where you're going to take the character. There are plenty of ways of where you can go. You can rise the power, you can sit there and just be whatever, you can buy a bonded, you could become a bonded, you could have a vendetta with someone. Where you go in Ashenfold is strictly up to you as the player. So I think we've pretty much covered a lot of the biography aspects. Have I forgotten anything, guys?
I think you pretty much covered just about everything.
You forgot to ask Dark a question.
Alright, so Dark. Let's ask one of the harder questions a lot of people ask me. Dark, how can you fit a good character, and we don't really like saying good or evil, how can you fit a good character into the cartel? A lawful good character. I'm gonna give you that.
One of the key things a lot of people who don't when you're trying to fit a lawful good character or just a good character in general, in mindset and ideals, you kind of wind up overthinking it a lot. But the simple concept of a good guy working for bad people, it's simple as that. And they're complete. Usually, for the most part, most of these the good ideals kind of, in some cases, kind of blind them from a lot of the stuff that the cartel is. Yeah, in some cases. Go ahead.
Just quickly here, as Kyndra has often said, we often say the cartel's neutral. And one thing we often do is, a lot of people, and I'm sorry for cutting you off there, Dark, and I'm just going to bring this up here quickly. A lot of people that I've played with when I do D&D, if you've ever played a D&D thing, you're always going to get that one person, somehow, that wants to make that really annoying character, or makes the halfling, or makes the elf, and at least one person is going to make the psychopath. So, if you really think about it, if a D&D group can play through an entire story and have characters of different alignments, then I think a guild can do that. There's a lot of people out there who really kind of say, my character will never deal with that stuff. Well, here's my simple answer. Maybe take a step back as the player and throw your character into these situations. Now, if that's against your limits, that's fantastic. But I think a lot of people, in a lot of ways, limit story creation because they're not willing to take a step out of the spotlight and actually deal with a villain that isn't just Stanley Whiplash. And in the cartel, that's kind of what we do. We tell people, well, once you reach a certain point, you really can't back out. You're stuck. You're between a rock and a hard place, and that's knowing too much. So Darkon's character could be lawful stupid or lawful good, a righteous member of the Char race, but he goes too far. He has to learn to adapt to a situation, or he'll just characterize. And this is the kind of aspects that really make good story. If your character is static for the entire time that you're playing this game, then, well, you're kind of just letting them sit there, they're sitting them out there to dry. If you ever read a good book, characters don't stay the same. They change. And alignment can change, or the aspects of how they deal with the world can change. This is a world where ancient Cthulhian Lovecraftian dragons have risen from over 1,000 years of sleep. They rival the power of the gods. And your paladin can't get along with a mage because the mage decides it's okay to light a pigeon on fire. That's a little interesting. It doesn't mean you have to get along, but the two characters can be in the same group at the same time. The conflict between them will create story. Now, I'm not saying people should sit there and be a jackass, but I am saying that you shouldn't avoid a bad character or a good character or a character type just because you think there's going to be a little conflict. And I do think a lot of people do that. They want to sit in their villain guild or in their good guild or whatever. And I love those guilds. They're fantastic. They bring a great aspect to the story. The only problem I ever get with that is when they niche themselves to the point where they don't interact with others who aren't good, who aren't evil, who aren't gray, who aren't dark, or who aren't light. And that's where the community starts really fraying. So, what do you think, Dark?
I think that's about right. Heck, even for me, that's always a problem. Even though niches are great, you wind up getting stuck in that niche and you fall into those terrible holes, and you kind of have to claw your way out of it.
The best stories aren't about the epic hero saving the world. It's the best stories are about the Hobbit and his friend taking the ring after being tossed in the middle of things and defeating the Dark Lord. The reason why and then I keep saying the Hobbit. The reason why the Hobbit is so awesome is because Bilbo is a know-nothing hobbit in the middle of nowhere, and he's dragged along on an adventure. Frodo is so respected because he is taken along and he's thrust into this world where he has to make tough decisions. Strider is beloved because he is a man that deals with his own feelings. These are characters that aren't just about being epic heroes. Just like, every villain character doesn't have to be about wah ha 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 ha, tie the girl to the train track. The really good stories in roleplay come from the fact when people interact, they create conflict, there's an antithesis, and then there's a synthesis of solution and a climax, and then the story moves on. Good roleplay is about moving plot and interaction between characters. That's my personal philosophy. So, in Ashenfold, that's what we look for. We really look for dynamic characters, and we're not saying, there's a specific way to do this, but we really encourage different characters of different type to coexist with each other, and then let their own connection form the basis of our plot. So do you guys think we've covered everything?
Okay, yeah, that kind of really covered everything.
Yeah.
Alright, so before I leave, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some lore that we've been doing. So, before we left off with the last few things, we talked a bit about the coin and the hunt. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the voice, because I think we should just quickly toss this in here. The voice is the social arm of the cartel, and if you're wondering what the voice is, that's one of the sects. The voice is a mixture between the underhand, the right hand, and entertainment. When I say the underhand, if anyone here has ever played Legend of the Five Rings, think the Scorpion Clan. If not, if you've ever seen a political drama, that's the guy who's willing to do the dirty work for the politician. That's what the Black Court does. That is what the darker allegiance or sub-faction in the voice is all about. The voice is also known for being the major contributor and controller of the entertainment racket of the cartel. They're the ones who set up the various events. They're the ones who run charities. They're the ones who also cater events or, promote talented individuals. You'll have circus performers or dancers or courtesans or therapists. They all work for the artisan court. Finally, you have those who are mixtures of ambassadors, paid or dirty cops or authority figures who are willing to bend the rules to benefit the good of the people. If anyone here has seen Kingdom of Heaven, think of the time when Baleen is offered the chance to kill Raynon de Chatagnon and save the lives, but instead, because he was being such a righteous asshole, he ends up causing a battle that kills thousands of people. That's the kind of thing you're going to see in the voice, and that's the Crimson Court. The other thing is we're talking about Char warband leaders, like my character, who might have connections that help out the Ashlar, the Blood, or the Iron Legion. You can also be the leader of a noble house. You can be a member of a breakaway sect of the Nightmare Court, or a member of a crew of the Inquest. This is the place where if you really want to play a political or have a character that represents a group, like a non-guild entity, this is where you put it in. This is where politics is. That's what the voice is all about. That's why they're called spinners. And so the voice is, and so that's pretty much what the voice is about. And if you're curious, when we talk about Black Court, we don't just talk about, assassins or anything. We have spies. We have people who go around abducting people called interrogators. We have people called knaves who go and create, problems. And the voice is probably going to be the major person you're going to find, the major group you're going to find up in Divinity's Reach. Mostly for that's because where a lot of nobility are. And even though in the recent update the voice has lost a lot of its human nobility connections, there are still strong connections there to a point. And that is a good example of everything. So, I quickly gave you a little bit of an interview of how to look at the biography. I talked about the initiation, and I gave an overview of the voice sect. This has been AshenMythos. Everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
It's kind of random, guys. This is a not so serious one. Anyway, have a good time. See you next time. Hopefully a little bit before launch or a little bit afterwards. And be on the lookout at Ashenfold.com for the PAX coverage we'll be taking care of. And also possibly a question from Jeff Grubb if one of our members can catch him up in Sweden recently. Anyway, have a good day and have a good time at launch, guys. Bye.